Up, I'm Cal, I'm 21, and I actually do know how to read. Okay, so today we're going to be playing some nature bingo, provided to us from Forest, Ontario, which is a cool site. If you want to play along at home, I have posted the Forest, Ontario link in the description below to the nature bingo, so you can play along at home as I do this and show you a few cool things that I found myself while doing nature bingo in my own backyard. Our first square on Nature Bingo is the lake. And so for all purposes of this video, my lake behind me, it's actually my backyard pool, but my lake behind me is Lake Erie. And so Lake Erie is part of the Holmes system. It's part of the Great Lakes. And so Holmes stands for Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and S, Superior. So those are our Great Lakes. And they're pretty great, I'd like to say. Anyway, so Lake Erie. So Lake Erie, our lake behind us here, is by far the southernmost, shallowest, and smallest by volume of all of the Great Lakes in terms of surface area. So yeah, it's the shortest average water resistance time, and at its deepest point, Lake Erie is 210 feet, which equals out to about 64 meters deep, and I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so I've reached destination 2 on my nature bingo sheet, and that's finding a bee. Well, there's no bees out right now that I can see or have seen today. I am able to spot some areas where they might have been in the past, and so right along here is where they generally like to create nests and kind of just like spread and like create that hive that they do. And so some fun facts about bees while we're in this area is one bee can fly about 90,000 miles 3 times around the globe to make 1 pound of honey. So you're flying 3 times around the globe. I haven't even flown around the globe once, let alone 3 times in order to make a pound of honey. The average bee only makes 1/12 of that during its entire lifetime. So if you're a bee, you're just like flying around. You're like, where are the flowers? Where do I go? What 50 to 100 flowers during my trip am I going to go to on average in order to make this 1/12 of a teaspoon during my entire life. So it takes a ton of bees to create the amount of honey that we consume. And that's why there's a lot of people that are bee collectors and have started bee farms in order to get honey and produce it widespread. And so a honeybee can fly up to 6 miles and as fast as 15 miles per hour. That's pretty fast when you're thinking about things. I have to get in my car and go if I'm going to try to go 15 miles an hour. So why are bees important? Well, bees are important because they pollinate approximately 130 agricultural crops in the United States, including fruit, fiber, nuts, and vegetables. Bee pollination adds to approximately $14 billion annually to improved crop yield and quality. I think that's pretty sick. Bees do a lot for our environment, and bees do a lot for the ecosystem altogether. And so if you've ever watched the Bee Movie with Mary B. Benson, it shows like a lot of what the bees do and what different jobs they have within the hive, and the different levels of hierarchy that are seen within bee colonies and bee hives. So Barry B. Benson is a fictional character, but the story and the jobs and all of the things within that movie are pretty sick, and they're pretty realistic to bee lives. All right, so we've made it to our next stop on our nature bingo, which is the hummingbird. And so hummingbirds in my own backyard like to hang out around this area. And so generally my mom has hung a sugar feeder for the hummingbirds here in the past, but it doesn't seem to be there anymore. So They are red generally, and then they have little flowers where the hummingbirds can come and grab the sugar water that is put into those areas. And so some fun facts about hummingbirds are that they are the smallest migrating bird. They don't flock like other species, and they typically live alone and travel alone for up to 500 miles at a time. The name hummingbird comes from the humming noise they make with their wings because they beat so fast, they hum. Hummingbirds are the only birds that can fly backwards. I think that's pretty cool. Hummingbirds have no sense of smell. Absolutely none. They can't smell. And so they can't sniff out feeders, but they do have good color vision. And that's why the hummingbirds and the feeders that we put up here are red. In order to see where they're going. So they can't smell, but they can see, and so that's why generally they're red or orange feeders. The average weight of a hummingbird is less than a nickel. So they weigh super small amounts. Their tiny legs are only used for perching and moving sideways while perched. They can't walk or hop. Hummingbirds drink the nectar found in the feeders by moving their tongue in and out about 13 times per second. They can consume up to their body weight in a day. The average number of eggs laid by a female hummingbird is only 2. These eggs have been found in nests smaller than $50 and compared to the size of a jelly bean or a coffee bean. Some species, like the black-chinned hummingbird, make their nests with plant down spider silk and other natural resources that can expand as their babies grow or hatch. A flock of hummingbirds can be referred to as a bouquet. A glittering, a hovering, a shimmering, or a tune. So it's got a few different reference words that you can use there. And so there are lots of different types of hummingbirds. There are over 330 species of hummingbirds in North and South America. And so there are a few common species, which are the rufous hummingbird, Anna's hummingbird, calliope hummingbird, broad-tailed hummingbird, ruby-throated hummingbird, and the black-chinned hummingbird. Those are the ones that you're generally going to see in North America. There are obviously a lot more different types of hummingbirds, and so when you do spot a hummingbird, it's cool to identify it because there are tons of different types of hummingbirds that you can spot and see out there. So next time you spot a hummingbird, I challenge you to take a picture, identify what it's like, what kind of hummingbird it is, and where you might spot it next, or what kind of different things make it different from other hummingbirds. So because there are over 330 species of hummingbirds, there's tons of hummingbirds that you might be able to see. And so if you do see one next, try to get a picture of it. I know they're pretty fast. They do hum, and they are really speedy. So if you get a picture of it, chances are you might get its like wing halfway through in motion. So if you do spot a hummingbird next, I challenge you to try to identify what kind of hummingbird it is. All right, so the next spot on our nature bingo is the willow tree. And so the willow tree, otherwise known as the weeping willow, kind of looks like if you were to place like a bunch of spooky beads on a ghost and then transfer it into a tree. And so I'm gonna post a picture right here. And so the willow tree is a deciduous tree. And so deciduous means that it is not coniferous. So coniferous is like pine needles. And so anything with needles is considered a coniferous tree. And so you think your pine tree, your Christmas tree, any kind of tree like that is going to be coniferous. And so think cone. So coniferous is in a cone shape. Think pine cone, cone, things like that. That's coniferous. And so deciduous trees are the ones with your nice, fancy, broadened, laid out leaves. And so that can be your oak tree or your maple tree. Even your willow tree is actually considered to be deciduous because it doesn't have cones. It doesn't have pine, or it doesn't have needles. Sorry, not pine. Well, that too. But other fun facts about the willow tree include the height. So rare willows can grow up to 70 feet. The average willow tree reaches about 35 to 50 feet. It's actually one of the fastest growing plants in the world. It can grow 10 feet in height each year. So due to its ability to absorb large quantities of water, the willow is often planted in flooded areas that need to be drained. And that's why you see a lot of willow trees in swampy areas. Strong, deep, and wide roots also prevent erosion from the soil. So if you wanted to prevent erosion in an area, you would generally plant a lot of willow trees, and that's why you're seeing a lot of different willow trees in swampier areas or in areas that would likely erode. So if you're looking in areas such as the desert, you're not likely going to see a willow tree because it's not swampy and it's not an area where a lot of water needs to be absorbed. And it's easy for willow trees to die, actually, if you do not provide them with with large quantities of water, because they do need that water to survive, and so do a lot of other organisms that are planted in the ground. And so without water and without sunlight, the willow tree isn't going to thrive. And so my parents actually got married under a willow tree about 25 years ago, or 26 years ago, something like that. And so that willow tree actually has since been cut down due to the fact that it had started dying. And so it started dying because it was placed in a field that was once likely swampy and full of water, and then due to years of that tree soaking up the water, it then started to die because there wasn't enough water being filled. And so when you're looking at a willow tree and when you're looking at the different parts of what's going on within your own tiny ecosystem and your ecosystem that can be seen where you are, so when considering the willow tree, you want to consider all of the different aspects and different things that play into that. And so when you're planting your willow tree in a swampy area, it will grow super fast, and it will grow to be this big, huge, massive tree that looks like it's drooping and looks like it's got like beads over a ghost kind of thing. They're super cool trees, and I urge you to check them out. Willow trees are super sick. They're one of my favorite trees due to the fact that they look kind of sad, but also they're very magical, and they're very, like, if you've ever seen the movie Avatar, if you think of the scene where they're both kind of in that forest of like glowy things, and then the trees that come down in that sequence that are like also glowing, the big massive tree, it's related back to the willow tree on Earth, as it is in the movie. And so the willow tree is very transferable in the fact that it's also used in sci-fi, which I think is really cool, because I'm a huge movie buff as well. And so when you can transfer the tree to fiction, it becomes this really cool, rad thing. Right, so next up on our nature bingo is soil, and I didn't move very far here due to the fact that soil's under our feet at all times. It's pretty rad that way. And so when you're looking at soil, there are tons of things that allow you to determine where you are in the world and what kind of animals and creatures and things live there. So scientists out there are able to determine where you are in the world based off of a handful of soil. So your handful of soil has tons and tons of different little microorganisms within it. And so when you're looking at the soil, you're able to see, oh, maybe this animal had this for lunch, and it's ended up in its dietary system, and it's ended up through as poop, and the poop from the animal then gets diluted down and diluted down and diluted down after years and years and years. And through the soil, you're able to see that, and you're able to see what kind of animal it was, what it ate, what other things are in the air. So like, are there wood chips in the soil? Are there specific plants to that area within the soil? And so you can see tons and tons and tons, and base off the environment and the ecosystem and where in the world, as well as what era this dirt is, or this soil is from, just based off of a handful. And so when you're looking at a handful of soil, I can pick up some right now, there are more microorganisms in this handful of soil than there actually is people on Earth. And so I think that's pretty cool to think about, that there are more microorganisms within that little tiny bit of soil that I just picked up there than there are people on Earth. So, other fun facts about soils is that soil has 6 layers. And so soil has a lettering system of layers. So O, A, E, B, C, and R. Horizon O is the top soil, and R is bedrock, which is pretty cool. You can check out more about soil in other locations. I'm going to move on from my nature bingo right now, but soil is super awesome, and it's super cool, and it's everywhere. So if you want to learn more about soil, I urge you to, because there is so much cool stuff that you can learn about soil. Okay, so our next stop on our nature bingo is acorns. And so I have actually gotten this acorn off of the ground due to the fact that this tree behind me is an oak tree. And so oak trees produce acorns. And so acorns are you could say fruit kind of nut that is produced in a single seed, rarely 2 seeds, enclosed in a tough leathery shell. And born in a cup-shaped cupule. Acorns vary from 1 to 6 centimeters long and 0.8 to 4 centimeters broad. So this one here is pretty tiny. You can see its shell on the outside, and then it's got a little hat on. They kind of look pretty funky. You can make a craft out of acorns. You can do a lot of things with acorns. They're pretty cool. Okay, so our next stop on our nature bingo is leaves, and I'm not talking about leaves as in the Toronto maple leaves, or even the Canadian leaf. The Canadian leaf and the Toronto maple leaves are both based off of the maple leaf from the sugar maple tree that, actually there's one behind me, right here is a sugar maple tree. So you're able to see what different plant it is based off of the leaf. And so if I'm looking at the ground right now, there are tons of leaves around me. And so picking up just a singular leaf would allow me to distinguish what type of tree it is. Now, leaves do go through a decompositional time period where you might not be able to determine just by looking at it with your own eyes what kind of leaf it is. So that's where different testing comes in, and different scientists come in, and they're like, here's what kind of tree it's from, this is the kind of leaf it is, here's where it is on the decompositional period of its life. And so a leaf is an above ground plant organ. And so the above plant organ. So your organs are all inside of your body. Plants have them kind of outside. Although you could kind of compare bark to your epidermis or your skin. And so when you're looking at a tree, bark could be like the epidermis. And I guess the leaves could be compared to maybe your nails or other different aspects. Maybe your hair could be your leaves. I would say more hair than nails, but both could play a part. And so due to the fact that it's an organ, it does have functions. And so the functions of the leaves is to photosynthesize and produce gas exchange. And so they do some pretty rad stuff that way. So leaves are often flat. They absorb light, and they're thin. So sunlight can get to the chloroplasts. That's a hard word. That one's tricky. Chloroplasts. in its cells. And so most leaves have stomata, which open and close. And so when you're looking at different plant cells, you'll be able to tell where that is in your plant cell based off of looking at a leaf and looking at a diagram of such. And so leaves are pretty rad, and they photosynthesize to help the gas exchange. And they're not just a Toronto hockey team. All right, so next stop on our nature bingo is tree buds. And so tree buds, when they start to produce, are called terminal buds. And so the buds, as they start to come out and start to form, become leaves, or become, so they become leaves. And so leaves, we talked about earlier, are these really cool things that help with photosynthesis and help with that whole process. But before, because the tree is unable to produce energy in winter due to the cold and due to the weather, they start to form in the springtime. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of buds and tree buds in the spring, due to the fact that the leaves all fall off in the fall, and generally that's what we see fall as, is the fall of the leaves. And then in the spring, buds start to form and things start to flower. And so when we see these buds, we're able to make the connection that they will one day, in turn, become the leaves that we have seen all over the trees, which is pretty cool. Okay, so the next stop on our nature bingo is rain, and that's why I've brought you over to the eaves troughs here, due to the fact that they aid in the water collection process. And so when rain falls and when water comes onto your roof, it will then come down the roof and into these things here, called the eaves troughs, which will then, in turn, put all of the water into this pipe and down to the ground. And so they are there for your building so it doesn't ruin different areas. It also helps so not all of the rain is just coming off your roof all at once. And so if you're standing here, it's not just like rain, like waterfalls. It comes down into the eaves troughs and down in one area. So then it's not just Niagara Falls on everyone's roof. So rain falls in the form of droplets, and this is called precipitation. And so the water droplets that fall from the sky are due to precipitation in the clouds. And so water can also fall from the sky in a form of hail, sleet, or snow. And so rain isn't the only thing that is able to fall from the sky. And so hail can happen, which can produce large chunks of ice or small chunks of ice that are just free falling from the sky, doing their thing, vibing, as well as sleet or snow. And so rain is one of the important parts of what we call the water cycle. And so water, like most things, has a life cycle of itself. And so when we're looking at the water cycle, rain is one of the last steps, although because it is a cycle, it keeps going continuously. So ground, clouds, precipitation, back on down. And so rain is really one of those cool things that you can look at and be like, wow, that's part of the water cycle. That's due to precipitation and what we call rain droplets that are what fall. So that's pretty cool. Rain actually occurs not only on Earth, but also other planets. And we've seen this through different areas that happen. Although rain in different areas, such as other planets, doesn't necessarily happen as it does on Earth, which you are able to check out if you're interested in different solar system knowledge. Okay, so our next stop on our nature bingo is roots. And so roots, we've learned about lots of other parts of the tree. So we've learned about the buds, we've learned about the leaves, but now we're talking about the roots. And so they're down here, as you can see, and they stem into the ground, keeping the tree in place, making sure it doesn't waver, it doesn't move, it keeps it secure, and so the tree just doesn't pop right out. Other things roots do is dryland crops grow 90% of their roots in the top 10 centimeters of their soil. The remaining 10% of roots may grow as deep as 2 centimeters or 2 meters to lap deep water for survival and insurance for ideal conditions. So roots can grow up to 1 centimeter a day, which is pretty cool. And I don't know if you caught it with all of the different things I just said there, but roots actually can go and they can reach down into the underwater supply and they can pick from it in order to maintain growth. And so if we go back to our willow tree for a minute, our willow tree needs an immense amount of water. And so being in swampy conditions actually benefits it. But for trees such as our oak tree that we saw as well, it doesn't necessarily need as much of a supply. And so the underwater reserves and the underwater supply will be enough for the oak tree to grow. And so it depends on the different tree, and it also depends on the different plant, because plants also have roots, not well, trees are plants, but all different types of plants have roots in order to keep them structured and in order to maintain their life. All right, so the next part of our nature bingo is the stamen. And so the stamen is the male reproductive organ of a flower producing the pollen. And so the stamen has two parts, the antler and the stalk. And the stalk is also called the filament. So here, if we look at the flower, your stamen is going to be right in here. And so that's the part that aids in the production of pollen and that the bees want, and that play into a larger part of our whole ecosystem picture. And so this little tulip allows us to get the honey that we need and get the different parts that we need when looking into the whole entire process and the whole entire life cycle of an ecosystem when looking at this little guy here or any of the aspects that we've seen today. Okay, so our next stop on our nature bingo is sunlight. And sunlight, if you look at our nature bingo sheet, sunlight is the thing that helps everything grow. And so when you're looking at all of your different plants and you're looking at all of the different aspects of the plants and the different cycles, you're also going to be looking at the sun. And so the sun is one of those large producers of each individual aspect of growth. And so when you're looking at photosynthesis, it needs light in order to produce. And so light from the sun allows each area to produce different plants as well as produce different forms of life due to the fact that it is there and it allows photosynthesis to happen. Now, not all plants do need light, but a lot of plants do need light in order to photosynthesize, which is super cool. So there are plants that do grow in dark and grimy locations. A lot of those are under the water plants, which we don't see a lot of anyway, due to the fact that they're underwater and we're above water. Unless you're a diver, you might see more of them, but the plants that we see around our area and in our own environments are due to the fact that light and sunlight is a thing, and so it allows for the different processes to happen within plants and animals in order to get that light in order to live. Okay, so our next stop on our nature bingo is clouds. And so you might be asking yourself, what is a cloud? Is it cotton candy that just like lives up in the sky? Well, that's not it. Well, as cool as that might be, clouds are actually tiny droplets of water that rise due to warm air. So as they rise, they become cooler and they show up kind of like the ones behind me. So clouds are white because they reflect the light from the sun. And so the sun, back to the sun, is also one of those cool things that allows us to see the world the way that we see it and the sky the way that we see it. So clouds, when they become so filled with water and there becomes so much water within them, they start to look gray. And so when we're looking at storm clouds and when we're looking at the grayness of the sky, that's due to the fact that there's so much water in the clouds that they don't have another place to go, and they're no longer reflecting the light like this fluffy white cloud behind me is showing. And so, yeah, so this is what we would call a cumulus cloud, due to the fact that it is fluffy and white, although storm clouds are more gray, which is really cool. So if you want to learn more about clouds, I also urge you to check that out. Anything actually in this video, if you want to do more research on. Super cool stuff. The environment and the world around us is awesome. So check those out. Okay, so our next stop on our nature bingo is squirrels. And so I generally see squirrels in the morning over here in this big tree, and they also like to run along the fence line here. And that's generally where I see squirrels when they are hanging out, but I don't see any today. So I'm just going to talk about them. So squirrels are rodents. There are over 280 different varieties of squirrels and species of squirrels. So most squirrels are small and have big eyes and bushy tails, which is generally speaking, there's a song about it, camp song about it. It's called Brown Squirrel, and it goes like, brown squirrel, shake your bushy tail. Yeah, and then so their large eyes are actually a skill which aids them in their climbing. And so their eyes allow them to skillfully climb trees and avoid predators because they're able to see so well. Squirrels eat mostly nuts, fruit, and seeds. And squirrels are actually born blind, which is interesting due to the fact that they depend on their eyes as they're growing up and as they're climbing their trees, like the one behind me. So, in Greek, the word squirrel actually means shadow tail. And the most iconic behavior of squirrels is storing nuts and acorns for the winter, which is necessary for the species of squirrel that don't hibernate. The hind legs... so, that's pretty cool. They store all their nuts. And yeah, they store all their nuts, but they don't hibernate. And so they stay up and they stay moving around during the winter months, which is different than, let's say, a bear who also stores all of its food, but does hibernate. So, So the hind legs of a squirrel are double jointed, which give them the ability to jump, run, and climb up trees as fast as they do. So that is pretty cool. Squirrels are rad. Squirrels are pretty awesome. And so if you want to learn more about squirrels, I urge you to do so. Do your own research at your own time, because these amazing creatures are hanging out all over the place. And so if you want to learn more about them, there's also a movie called The Nut Job, which is cool to check out. It's about squirrels and their different hibernation processes and trying to get food. And so it's kind of funny. It's a cartoon. Check it out if you want. Okay, so our last stop on the list is moss. And before I move on with moss, I don't know if you can hear the chirping in the background, but those are robins, and so the robins are communicating through their different tweets, not on Twitter, but in real life. And so the robins behind us use their tweeting as a form of communication between them all, which is cool because we get to experience it and hear it in real life. So if behind me there's ever a robin in the background, feel free to check it out. Because there are a lot of robins around right now, which is super cool. I really love birds. Might do a video on birds later, who knows. But yeah, so the chirping you hear is robins. And so as we move on with moss. So moss was actually the first plant on Earth. And prior to our beliefs about roots, moss actually doesn't have any. So moss is one of the only plants not to have roots. And so you can just pull it up from the ground. I don't urge you to do that at all. Leave moss where it is. But you're able to just pull it off so easily because it doesn't have those roots anchoring it in place. Mosses tend, like the willow tree, to grow in moist places. But some species are drought tolerant and cold tolerant. And so there are many different species of moss. A fun fact about moss is if anyone knows about the Salem witch trials, a certain species of moss was growing upstream. And that series of moss produced the same chemicals as a drug called LSD. And so it was running down the river and it was running down the stream into the city of Salem, which allowed the people of Salem to drink the mossy water that was producing the same chemicals as a dangerous drug. And so there are different types of mosses, and each type of moss has different chemicals and has different aspects to it. And so mosses are anchored to the earth by not roots, but things called rhizoids, which look like tiny roots. And so, yeah, you're able to pull them off pretty easily due to that fact. Yeah, so there are tons of different cool facts about moss. Moss can be made into, the proper mosses can be made into a variety of different things. But there is also some interesting stuff out there about, so moss itself evolved from algae. And so I don't know if you know what algae is, but it's the stuff that looks green and grimy on your swimming pool. You are swimming. So it looks green and grimy and gucky, and you don't want to kind of touch it or go near it, but it turns your swimming pool green. So you got to shock your swimming pool. Moss evolved from that. And so mosses are able to absorb a huge amount of water due to the fact that algae is a water plant and moss is also kind of a water plant, but you see it outside of the water. And so you can probably find some moss behind me here if you were to look enough. Mosses were actually, also another fun fact about moss is that it was used as a bandage during the First World War in order to prevent blood loss. And so the do anything to save that person principle of using moss as a bandage would have stopped it for the meantime, but would have potentially caused further damage and likely would have caused a lot of infection if used. But it's interesting to know, and it's interesting to see. I definitely would not ever use it as a bandage. Please don't go out and start using moss as bandages. That's not the message here. But it's cool to know that moss was once used as a bandage throughout history. And so mosses are non-vascular, and they absorb tons of water, like I said before. So you might be wondering why moss is soft. So they lack a vascular system in both their rhizoids and their above ground parts. They lack lignin, which is a complex compound that stiffens the stems of higher land plants. That's why mosses are soft. And their leaves are actually single-celled, thick like appendages. And so that's pretty cool. All of this is super rad. If you want to do more research on your own on any of these plants, I urge you to do so. There are a few things I didn't include in this video, which are a part of the nature bingo. And so if you find out about any cool things about the things I left out, leave them in the comments section below. I would love to hear what you have found on your own. And what you've learned about during this nature bingo. So leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you want to. But here has our nature bingo, and I hope you have a terrific day.